Does it work? Is this thing working now? Okay. Well, good morning.
Good morning.
My family and I have been visiting for like 5 years, on and off, and we've noticed the change in the congregation and the desire to be more like the first century church and to follow the pattern, and the excitement and the enthusiasm of the new preacher and the things that are being taught, and the desire to have elders and go forward in that way. And with that comes the responsibility as Christians to have an answer for the things that we're proclaiming. So I thought about it. I thought, well, we're going to need to know a few things when we start bringing new people into this building and start talking to the people in the community. They're going to ask us, why do you do certain things? Why do you believe certain things? Well, what's wrong with this and what's wrong with that? What about, the main one I get is, what about you're saying everybody else is wrong and you're the only one right? How can that be? So there's certain things that are going to crop up. So I just wanted to go over a few things today about our own beliefs. And does everyone have the right to his own belief? See if I get this thing correctly. And here's what we'll do. The main thing is attending the church of your choice. Just driving in this morning, there's lots of different churches. There's a religious group right across the street, and there's several just driving here. So does anybody have the right to his own belief? And can we attend the church of our choice? Because that may be the first question we get when we start to speak to people. Well, there is the Catholic, there is Baptist, and it goes on and on. And there's, of course, this little sign above ours says the Church of Christ. So we know that these questions are going to come up, so we want to have an answer for them to what we believe about that situation and about that question. We live in a society that allows such religious freedoms, and that's good in this country to have that. But we know that God might not agree with some of these other religious institutions. Tolerance has been developed toward each other's beliefs, and that's a good thing because we're told to live in the world. So we have to be peaceably with those that believe different things, even in the so-called Christian realm. And we don't have to participate in the world. Not participating in the world can be easy for us sometimes because we know we're not going to murder and steal and lie and, the big ones, right? Okay, that's easy. We don't have to participate in that. And we see people participating in that every day, those types of things. And of course, we hear about it. But when it gets to religious groups and religious activity that's all under the veil of Christianity and being a Christian, then the lines get a little blurry, and we have to be able to distinguish them for those people that ask us the questions we need to answer. We all have those civil rights in this country, and we have to check the authority that we need to assemble and do the things that we have. Members of denominations emphasize that each should be allowed to worship God in his own way. And they do cater to people. They also believe that God accepts the worship in each of those denominations. So if you were to talk to, say, a Lutheran or a Life Tabernacle and some of the many groups that you see, they would say, sure, as long as you're a good person, follow the Bible, and do what you're supposed to, you'll be covered. And we can all live peaceably and agree to disagree. But we need to check and see what the Bible tells us. We also know that Satan is the author of this concept that God will accept any belief and any type of practice as long as it's under the veil of Christianity. And that's why there is probably so many out there, because Satan has deceived people to believe that what they practice is correct. We studied that in the simple term of baptism in the class this morning. The various ways that baptism is twisted in just by saying you need to be baptized, and they say, well, not really, because, and then they give crazy reasons. So we want to have those kind of biblical examples of what we need to do. God has never revealed that he will accept every man's worship, and that's what we're going to study today. Just what we hear is, just as long as you're a good and honest person in your own mind, then you'll be covered. I've had people that don't believe in the Bible or anything to do with any religious group. They believe that there is a God, possibly, and then as long as they're good and honest and sincere in their own mind, they'll, I don't know where they get that from, because they have nothing to do with any religious group, but they believe if they're doing something that's not harming another, then they go to the heaven, whatever heaven they believe in. So there's all sorts of realms of people we're going to run into once we start proclaiming that we want to be a church patterned after the first century. In Isaiah 8:20, it gives us a little insight. Isaiah 8:20, to the law and to the testimony, if they do not speak according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. So even Isaiah said, if you're not going to follow God's word back then, it's the same thing for us today. So, the reason every man does not have the right to his own belief, and that's the part that's missing, is us understanding that we don't have the right to our own belief if we're going to believe in the God of the Bible. Why is it that man does not have the right to his own belief? That's going to be the big question when you tell somebody that, or if we're teaching something, that because all authority has been given to me, which is Christ, in heaven and on earth. And it says in Matthew 28:18, all power is given unto me in heaven and earth. Matthew 28:18, it tells us this. Jesus is the power, has the power to command, and he has the obligation, and we have the obligation to obey his commands. That's the important thing to remember. Once you proclaim that you are a Christian, then there's rules that you must follow and things that you have to start to obey, because you can't just say, I believe something, and then do your own thing and make it up as you go. We know that there's a God in heaven, and he has a Son that he is sent to this earth to proclaim how to get to the Father. And the Father says, this is my beloved Son, and he says, hear him. And that is, of course, in Mark 9:7. Jesus is the prophet of whom Moses spoke of. So way back when Moses was giving the law, he spoke of a prophet. And he talked about a prophet that's going to be like him, that's going to come, and that prophet is Jesus Christ. And in Acts 3:22 and 23, it tells us something about that. For Moses truly said to the fathers, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from the brethren. Him you shall hear in all things, whatever he says to you. And it shall be that every soul who will not hear that prophet, and that prophet is Jesus Christ, shall be utterly destroyed from among the people. So when this prophet came, Jesus Christ, we're told by God that we are to hear him, and then anyone who does not believe or does not hear him, Jesus Christ, then he will be destroyed from among his people. That's pretty strong words for do your own thing, follow the group of your choosing, and everything will be fine. So it's important to understand when you do read these sort of things, these sort of, in our day and time, it'd be harsh remarks that says, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. Nobody likes to hear that. So we have to take notice of those things. And that was found in Acts 3:22 and 23. Now, those who will be saved are only those who obey Jesus Christ. I mean, that's pretty simple. And of course, again, it is pretty strong. You have to do his will, as it says in Matthew 7. And in Hebrews 9, it tells you you have to obey. So you have to do the will and you have to obey. That's some of the other things that you have to do in order to hear this prophet, which is Jesus Christ, who came to take away the sins of man. It's pretty powerful stuff. But the man who does not obey the Lord will not be saved, no matter how sincere that he might be. And there are people out there that are very sincere. My daughter and Avery were talking about that there's people in other religious realms that are very sincere. They do devotions every night. They pray. They do things. And I'm standing there, and my daughter was sitting there, and she's like, this person is doing way more than I am. And I'm proclaiming that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and I know how he should be followed, but yet I'm not doing this. And then that inspires her once again and myself to do some of those things that are that prove that a little bit more, and they're a little stronger. So there's ways we can learn from others. So when we do see other groups and other people, and we talk to them about their religious practices, it doesn't mean that they're all bad. So we can look at those practices like devotions and prayers, and no matter what happens in your life, at the end of the day, instead of just falling asleep and saying, I'm so exhausted, some of these other people pick up their Bible and read some passages before they go to bed. And it's like, wow, okay, I can learn from that. And then you can take those and use those examples and use them in your own life to say, listen, I see that you do these things. I see that you're like Paul, you're very religious. Well, here's some other things that I've noticed about what you do that I don't do, and their difference and the differences. And I'd like to talk about them, and then insert some more truth and instruct them in the ways of righteousness a little bit more by using what they already do. That's good. And that's just one way we as a church can grow, by talking to people that are already religious, that may close their mind if we approach them in the wrong way. But if we get to know them and know that they're doing things that are good, then we can use those things as a way, your foot in the door, so to speak on their level. And I think that's important when we're talking about talking to people in the community. We see in Revelation 22:18 and 19, that the Lord has commanded men not to add to the revelation of God or subtract from it. John wrote about this, and it tells you in those passages. For sake of time, I won't read it, but you have the reference there. It tells us that we can't add or subtract to the Word. So by adding and subtracting is putting in other things, other ways of doing things in the more the modern realm. And that's what we have to steer away from. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. And that is written in Matthew 10:28. So we know that who are we supposed to fear? Not men and what they will do, but the one who has the power over all, and that would be God through Jesus Christ. And that's who we need to listen to. Now, the Bible examples demonstrate that man does not have the right to his own belief. And that's another problem that we have, is to say to someone, we don't have our own right to our own belief. We have to believe what is true, righteous, and that comes from God. People aren't going to like that. Now, there's 3 records that I'm going to go over in the Old Testament that proves the fact that we don't have the right to our own belief, and we don't have the right to our own type of worship. Because when God says, hey, I want you to do it a certain way, there's a way that needs to be done, and this is how I want you to do it to please me, then that's what we need to be following. That's what we need to look at. And there's 3 simple ones. Hopefully everybody will have heard it. The first one is in Genesis, way back in the beginning, and it's Genesis 4, verses 3 through 5. It tells us this. See if you recognize these names. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and his offering, but unto Cain and his offering he did not have respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. So right there, in just Cain and Abel, one brought fruit, one brought the fatlings or the meats and the fatlings. So right there, it tells you that God liked one and didn't like the other. They both came with their own beliefs. They both sacrificed. They both brought things that they had and that they had participated in, and they all wanted it to be pleasing. One had made up his own, and the other one did what God had said, just in that example, without so many words. Abel offered his worship by faith, and it says later that Cain did not. Hebrews 11:4. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, though through which he obtained witness that he was righteous. So one was righteous by his example and his offering, and one was not. So in our case, we have to make sure when we hear something said by me or anybody else that we are doing the right thing, that we are making our offering, our sacrifice to God, our worship has to be done in the correct way. And that means we have to find out if we are doing it correctly, just like these people did. God rejected also Nadab and Abihu's worship. And we find that in Leviticus 10, 1 and 2. Now these are the priests' sons of Aaron. They had certain things that they were told to do. Certain places they were told to get fire and ways of doing things. You know, in the Old Testament they had a lot of rules and stuff, and it was very difficult if you're reading it to figure out really what in the world, how do you keep track of all that stuff? You'd have to have a cheat sheet, at least I would, of what I have to do in order to do this right. But these guys obviously knew what they were supposed to do because they did all the elements correctly. They just said, well, we don't have time to go over there. We're running late. We'll just scoop some fire out of here, pop it in our pans, and go get this thing done. After all, fire is fire, correct? Well, we will find out what God said about that in Leviticus 10, in verse 1 and 2. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Now, obviously, in the New Testament, it talks about we have a much better way, because we're not going to burst into flames if we do something wrong. We know not to do it. We do something wrong. We're not going to be drug out by 2 or 3 witnesses and stoned to death by the congregation. Can you imagine all of us going out, well, Jim over here did it again, so this is the 3rd time. Boom, we got to stone him. We have a much better way. We have an advocate, Jesus Christ, who will talk to the Father for us and give us another chance. So that's a good thing, because they didn't have this second chance. They did what was wrong, and they obviously got burst into flames and died by God. This shows that God's not pleased with just any type of worship. You can't just do most of it correctly. And that's a big responsibility for us when we're teaching other people, and for us when we're participating in worship and the people that we talk to. There's one last example, and that would be of Jeroboam's worship. And that can be found in 1 Kings 12, 26 through 33. We know that Jeroboam set up, they were told that they had to go to Jerusalem and go to the temple, and that's where all worship was to be done. So when Solomon lost the kingdom and all that sort of business and he died, his kids decided to take over. There was a split kingdom, and Jeroboam decided that he was going to set up his own stuff because he didn't want to go over to his brothers or the other guy's side. So he set up Dan and Bethel. He said, now this is where you're going to go. Don't worry about going to Jerusalem. It's too far. Who wants to go all the way there? You can go right here. We can get it done. And then he set up idols. He used priests that were not from the sons of Aaron. He changed feast days and set up his own thing. We know that Jeroboam was rejected, and his worship was rejected, and the people that followed that denomination, so to speak, in our terminology today, they were not with God. So They were ultimately destroyed. They could not follow their own belief, even though it was very close and it was similar groups and all the rest of that. So there's a very fine line sometimes between crossing the line into sin in worship and doing the right thing. Some things in which we have no personal right of our own, to our own beliefs are these. We can't just think anything about Jesus. We have to know what we are told by God who Jesus is. And in John 8:24, it says this, "Therefore I said to you that you will die in your sins if you do not believe that I am He. You will die in your sins." So you have to believe that Jesus is the one, or you can't be saved. We must believe in Jesus to be saved. He also said in Mark 16:16 something that's very important. So we'll turn to Mark. Sixteen. "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned." And that's what it tells us in the Bible, how we are to be saved, is that we have to believe that Jesus is the Christ, and it tells us here that we have to be baptized in order to be saved. It's the same thing we talked about this morning in the group class under baptism. If you haven't come to that, there's a little book in the back table there by the glass AV, what do you call that? AV booth? They still do that? They still call it what? Okay, the booth back there where they do all the electronics. I'm not really up on all that, but I am learning it, as you can see, with all this fancy stuff. And this comes from PowerPoint Windows 10 or something, so 2010. So it is still behind, but luckily this computer will pick up my old stuff. The one before that was 2000. So I had to transfer it from 2000 to 2010 to see if it was actually going to work on a modern machine. And it is different. When you push the button, different things pop up. So if I look like I'm going, this is the PowerPoints have changed, so I have to reconfigure myself. Anyway, side note. The man who rejects that Jesus was born of a virgin, performed miracles, and his blood for the forgiveness of sins was cast and was raised from the dead cannot be saved. That's pretty simple. So that's all we have to do when we're talking to people is basically start with that. That's a simple thing. You know, there's certain things you have to do. And then a lot of people will agree, because there's not too many people that haven't heard of Jesus Christ by now in this area. So if we're talking about evangelizing in this city, for example, in growing numbers, they're not going to find too many people that haven't heard that, but you can always start with the basic like that. And then they'll go, yeah, that's what we believe too. You go, oh, well then how do you worship? And then you can ask them. And I've always found it very nice. It's very nice when you're talking to people that are religious, that if you just play dumb. Oh, you believe that too? Yes. You're like, well, what do you do in order to, worship God? And then, boom, you got an opening. That way we don't have to start throwing stones at what they do or do not practice if we know some of what they do. It's always good to find out what common grounds we have to say, before we say you're standing on sand and we're standing on stone. So, anyways, it's always good to do that. Next, we do not have the right to choose what name we shall wear in religion also. Or, in this case, what church we want to we belong to. So there's certain things we don't have the right to do. And in Matthew 16:18, it gives us some insight there. I'm going slower because I was told that I speak too fast. So I didn't write down my verses. I'm actually looking them up. So I won't go so quickly. So Matthew 16:18. "And I say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the rock is that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and his church is going to be built on Christ. And that's the important thing, because you'll run into groups that talk about where their church started. So if you look in the history of the different groups, if you're talking to somebody that belongs to another religious group, you'll see where their founders were. You can look that up. And it was founded in 18 this, and it was founded by this woman or by this guy, or back all the way back to 1600, or even the 3rd or 4th centuries. And they always have a beginning. And the beginning of the actual church that Christ built was built at this particular time, in the times of the apostles, shortly after Christ died and he was crucified. So that's what we want to go back to, is start there and then build from that foundation. We also do not have the right to choose the name that we wear. So if you choose a name, it's important what it means when you choose the name. So if you have Lutheran or Methodist or Catholic or Baptist, and what does it really tell you? You know, then you have to find out, well, what does that mean to be a Lutheran when the name is Christian? It's a simple, they were called Christians first. In Antioch, it tells us in the Bible. So where do you derive your name? And then they can start telling you where they get this from. And if you look in Isaiah 62:2, it tells you something. The Gentiles shall see your righteousness, and all kings your glory. You shall be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord will name. The new name is obviously Christians. And that passage that I talked about, they were called Christians, first in Antioch, is in Acts 11:26, is where that can be found. And Paul rejected the idea man could wear another name and still be saved. And that's in 1 Corinthians. So if we turn there, it'll tell us something about that. So 1 Corinthians, where is that? 1, 10 through 13. Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing. So that's important that we speak the same thing, and that's what he's telling us. We have to speak the same thing. And that there are no divisions among you, but that ye be perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment. For it hath been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are of the house of Chloe, that there are contentions among you. Now this I say, that every one of you saith, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas, and I of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? So right there it tells us that division, we know, is not right in the church individually between us and in the religious realm, that he's not going to like the fact, God is not going to like the fact that says, I am of the Church of Christ and I am of the Church of the Methodists and I am the Church of the Baptists. He's not going to like that. So we have to find a ground or a way of speaking to people to say, hey, there may be another way. And we also understand that it's important that we do not have the right to determine what the standard of holiness we follow is. So there is actually a standard of holiness. And that can be found in Galatians 5:19 through 21. So what do I mean by that? Because God revealed that there is a standard of holiness, and if he reveals it, then we have to follow it. So, some people in the religious realm, even today, especially today, they call themselves Christians, but they do things that are far from Christianity, even in the basic sense. Some Christians choose to be gay. I've seen churches where they're gay churches. They actually call themselves a church. They study the Bible, I don't know how they get around that, but they're all participating homosexuals. Some choose to drink, and they have the, what is it? I don't remember where it is, but it's the Church of the Cannabis. Don't ask me how that works out. You're told to be sober, but I don't think they mean you can drug yourself up in other ways. So there's a lot of groups out there that obviously have gone way, way past that which is authorized and still call themselves churches. And there's other ones that are way more subtle, that have been around a lot longer. In Galatians 5, 19 through 21. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these. And here's that great place that has a list. So you can turn to the list and say, all right, am I doing any of these things? Am I covered? Or are these other groups doing any of these things? So here's some right here. They're manifest, and these are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envies, murders, drunkenness, and revellings, and the such like, of which I tell you before, as I have told you in the past time, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. So there's a big list there that tells you of things that if you do them, then you will not be able to participate in what God has to offer, which is obviously salvation. Now, some of these are the big three. Of course, it's easy: adultery, hatred. It's a little bit trickier because there are things that we don't like and we hate, but you have to control that. Murders, drunkenness, but there are other ones that are a little bit more subtle that we have to be careful of as we practice Christianity, and that would be, say, lasciviousness would be a one that you wouldn't know that necessarily would cross the line. And lasciviousness is just acting in such a way that it's sexually provoking. Now, there's lots of places you can go to do that. Mainly that I know of is dancing clubs, for example. Nightclubs and dancing clubs where you go around and everybody's, prom, as they say, everybody's jumping around, dancing in such a way and moving in such a way, wearing certain things, and that would be considered lasciviousness. It's not a word we use a lot today, but that's one of those subtle things that you can fall into without knowing. And then the other thing I was talking with Avery about was revelings, and that particular definition is just going out from party to party, hopping around. And in one case, it would be bar hopping, even if you don't participate in the alcohol, but just participating in the reveling from place to place to place to place. That would be considered something that a Christian wouldn't do, is hopping around to different places and parties. That's something you wouldn't necessarily think of. So we don't have that right to determine our own standard of holiness. We have to figure out what it is. And what I like about the King James is they've got all these words like witchcraft, heresies, and idolatry. You're like, oh, we don't do that. So some of these words, though, we don't use today. So it's good to look them up and to know what our standard of holiness is. Go a little bit further than what we can see in the surface. And then the last thing is determine how to worship God. We cannot just say we are going to worship God in this particular way, and that's it. We can pick and choose our own way. So to determine how to worship God is not up to us. God has given men a pattern to worship. And I think in this group, we're trying to follow that particular pattern, like we haven't in the past, that I haven't seen in the last 5 years. But I think it's coming around. So here is the grouping of the 5 things that we need to follow and look at as Christians in this location. God has revealed that men should worship Him through, obviously the first one would be singing, and that's Ephesians 5:19. The second thing would be prayer, and that can be found in 1 Thessalonians 5:17. Observing the Lord's Supper is the third thing, and that's in 1 Corinthians 11. Giving, 1 Corinthians 16, and preaching sound doctrine, and that can be found in Acts 2:42. So that's your order of worship. It is singing, prayer, observing the Lord's Supper, giving, preaching sound doctrine. It's not that particular order, but it is those groups of things. So when talking with people of the world and when doing our own, we just have to examine ourselves to see if we're doing the things the right way and if we're doing things the righteous and sound way to God's standard of holiness. And if we are, then we're doing the right thing and we can go out there and teach and not have that worry about having the responsibility of leading people astray. So if you are here today and you are a Christian and you've fallen away, there are some things you need to do in order to get back. And that is to confess the things that you've done and to come forward and ask for the prayers of the saints. And if you are not a Christian and you want to become a Christian and have the benefits of being in Christ and knowing, at least in this location, what you need to do in order to be righteous and holy in His sight, we can help you with that. So if you have any needs, please come forward while we stand and sing.